It didn't drive me crazy, but I thought about it a lot, and I just like, there's secrets in these letters, and nobody can read them.
It's been 15 years since these siblings have all been in the same room together, and we've just delivered some shocking information. Lily, Filler, Dorothy, and Riches grew up in Regina, the children of Chinese immigrants. Now they're in their 60s and 70s, and they've come back to learn how, despite the odds, their parents built a life here, something they were always tight-lipped about.
I remember my mom saying, this drawer has all important papers. And it was just this drawer. So, you're curious as a kid, like, what's in here?
The siblings didn't know a lot about their dad's life before he moved to Regina. In 1913, George Hong-Soo Wong hopped on the Empress of Asia in Hong Kong and headed to Vancouver. He was just 17 years old. When George landed, he was slapped with a head tax. An estimated 81,000 Chinese immigrants had to pay this discriminatory fee to get into Canada. Starting at $50 in 1885, it cost $500 by the time George arrived. That's $15,000 in today's dollars.
I know the way Dad felt about China, communist China. So I think he would have done almost anything to come to Canada. And I think he probably did.
After welcoming laborers to build the Canadian Pacific Railway, the Canadian government decided it wanted to discourage further Chinese immigration. So it introduced the head tax, which wasn't repealed until July 1st, 1923. That same day, the Exclusion Act was introduced. It nearly entirely restricted Chinese immigration and prevented many Chinese people already here from obtaining Canadian citizenship.
To talk about the devastating impact of exclusion on Chinese communities and Chinese families is to think about the incredible isolation and loneliness that these communities experienced as a result of exclusion.
We couldn't find much about the first few decades George spent in Canada, but we know that by the late 1940s, he had settled in Gull Lake. It's a small community 300 kilometers west of Regina. George's son Filler remembers visiting the town with his dad to place a headstone at the cemetery. He'd always been curious who it was for, so we took him and his siblings to Gull Lake. Older than 63, it's like the 20s or 30s. Okay. We weren't able to find the grave, but we did track down the spot where George's Cafe, United Nations, used to stand, and met with someone who knew their father. Bernard Kerwin was a regular there.
I was the only daily newspaper carrier, and so I covered the whole town, and it had about 60 or 70 customers, regular customers, and it was a daily, 6 days a week, and I had to drop one off at George's Cafe.
A book about the town describes George as an avid hockey fan who drove the local teams to games. Bernard remembers his generosity.
It was not uncommon for him to, when the teams came back to town, he would open up his cafe after hours and give a meal. Usually be bacon and eggs and toast and coffee and that kind of thing. Very outgoing. Quite a character, actually.
This is the original. I'm pretty sure that's the original.
This is the business the Wong siblings remember. Back then, it was called Modern Grocery. It was one of the businesses George opened after moving to Regina in 1954. He ran it alongside his new wife, Nellie Wong. When the Exclusion Act was repealed in 1947, George was able to travel back to China to get married. The family of 7 lived upstairs. It's still a Chinese-owned business, and the current owner was kind enough to show us around.
Do you remember this?
Yeah.
I remember this like crazy. This is insane.
That's the original medicine cabinet.
Yes,
right?
the original medicine cabinet.
George and Nellie sent some of the money they earned overseas. It led to disagreements for the couple, though the kids never quite understood why.
So he was sending money to his side, and then my mom says, well, you need to send the same amount to her side. You know, even when my father passed, there were these lists of people, and I'm like, who are these people? Like, I had no idea.
George passed away in 1984 at the age of 88. 2 decades later, his wife Nellie was one of 785 Chinese Canadians who received $20,000 in compensation from the Harper government for the head tax.
Today's apology will not erase the painful memories for which these past measures are responsible, but it will allow for the healing process to begin.
Nellie continued to be haunted by her own past, something her children didn't fully understand until we translated those important papers she had stowed away in a drawer. They were addressing your mom's family. She had 3 children before she met your dad. She was widowed. And the interview questions were as if they were instructing the 2 boys, which they wanted to immigrate to Canada, how to answer interviews with somebody from immigration. The 5th Wong sibling, Pearl, wasn't able to visit Regina, but she joined us by video conference, and it didn't take her long to connect the dots. She had cared for her mom in her later years. Suddenly, Nellie's erratic behavior makes more sense.
Those are the 2 boys she was talking about, because when I had her in Calgary and she had to get hospitalized, she was looking for 2 boys and they didn't know.
It's okay, Pearl. It's okay, baby.
They were calling her from the other side to go.
We're unsure whether Nellie's sons ever made it to Saskatchewan. Among the documents are hospital services plan cards for the province from 1959 and 1960 that list the boys' names. That's the same time period they were corresponding with their mother and George. The plan was required for anybody who lived in the province for at least 3 months, but we couldn't find any other evidence of the boys in Canadian records.
I knew that she suffered so much, but now this kind of even makes it worse about how much she suffered.
Lily Cho says it's not uncommon for Chinese families in Canada to carry secrets like this.
That's part of the legacy of the Exclusion Act. I think that if you live for decades as a community with very, very stringent laws leveraged against your existence, you will retreat into forms of silence. And that will carry from one generation to another.
George and Nellie's sacrifices are not lost on their children.
And it benefited all of us, in a way. We grew up in a free country, supposedly, and we can make our own destinies, right?
I'm remembering those sacred moments with my father and having to come this far so that we can have what we have is amazing. Is amazing. And I hope that all these other people who also came that same road find that happiness as well.